Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
History often hides its darkest truths beneath the polished surface of patriotic pride and national progress. Behind the grandeur of victory speeches, scientific breakthroughs, and military dominance, there lurks a record of experiments and decisions that were never meant for public eyes. In the early days of the Cold War, when the United States had just begun to flex its nuclear strength and showcase its role as the new global superpower, it also embarked on projects that revealed how human lives could be treated as tools of science rather than as citizens with rights. Few episodes capture this uneasy truth more vividly than Project 4.1, a secret program that tested radiation effects on human beings, Americans and islanders alike, without their consent. The story begins not with the official name of the project, but with a blast so powerful that it forever changed the Pacific. On March 1, 1954, the United States detonated a thermonuclear bomb codenamed Castle Bravo at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. At 15 megatons, it was the largest nuclear test ever conducted by the United States, more than 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb that had destroyed Hiroshima. Scientists had predicted a yield of about 5 megatons, but the actual detonation exceeded their expectations by a staggering margin, releasing a radioactive cloud that spread far beyond the test site. What followed was both a tragedy and an opportunity in the eyes of the U.S. government. Downwind from the explosion, Marshallese islanders living on Rongelap, Utrecht, and other nearby atolls began experiencing what they could not yet recognize as acute radiation sickness. White radioactive ash, fallout laced with deadly isotopes, fell from the sky and coated their hair, their food, their water, and their skin. Children played in the strange dust, unaware it was not snow but poison. Within hours, nausea, burns, hair loss, and other devastating symptoms spread among the islanders. American servicemen stationed on nearby ships were also exposed. The tragedy was compounded when a Japanese fishing vessel, the Daigo Fukuryu Maru, popularly known as the Lucky Dragon No. 5, was caught in the fallout cloud, leading to severe radiation sickness among its crew and eventually the death of one fisherman. The event caused an international uproar, but behind closed doors, it provided the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission and its military counterparts with something they had quietly sought: the chance to study radiation effects on humans under real-world conditions. Thus was born Project 4.1, officially described as a study of the response of human beings exposed to significant fallout radiation. The project was not a spontaneous humanitarian mission to aid those affected, though it was framed as such for decades. It was, in practice, a scientific investigation designed to analyze how radiation exposure damaged the body, using a Marshallese and some U.S. military personnel as unconsenting subjects. The language of the internal documents reveals this duality. To the public, the effort was described as medical care for unfortunate victims of accidental fallout. Privately, it was recognized as a controlled study, one that could yield data of immense value for understanding radiation's long-term effects. For the islanders, who had trusted American promises that their lands and lives would be safeguarded, the aftermath was devastating. They were relocated, examined, and prodded by American doctors who often withheld the full truth of their conditions. Blood samples were taken. Detailed records of hair loss, skin burns, birth defects, and cancers were maintained. Yet the islanders themselves were rarely told what was happening inside their bodies. The Marshallese later recalled how they were treated more like experimental subjects than like patients receiving genuine medical care. In some cases, they were even returned to contaminated islands so that scientists could study the effects of living in a radioactive environment. Project 4.1 soon grew into a long-term study that tracked the health of exposed populations for decades. The data collected became invaluable for American scientists seeking to understand radiation's impact on the thyroid, immune system, reproductive health, and cancer rates. Children born after the fallout often carry the most heartbreaking legacy, with high incidences of congenital defects and growth problems. Women suffered miscarriages and stillbirths, while men developed various cancers and chronic health problems linked to radiation poisoning. The Marshallese became, in essence, a living archive of radiation's human toll. What makes this history particularly haunting is that the islanders were never given the chance to give informed consent. They were not warned about the risks, nor were they told that their continued suffering was being documented as part of an official U.S. government research program. While some American servicemen who were exposed were eventually acknowledged as atomic veterans and received limited compensation, the Marshallese struggled for decades to gain recognition of what had been done to them. The secrecy of the program shielded the United States from accountability, even as evidence slowly emerged. Declassified documents in the 1990s finally shed light on Project 4.1's true nature, revealing that it was not merely a rescue mission but a deliberate scientific study. These documents confirmed suspicions long held by the Marshallese, who had accused the U.S. of using them as guinea pigs. Their testimony over the years painted a picture of broken trust, promises of safety replaced with decades of sickness. The bitter irony was that the Marshall Islands had been placed under U.S. administration as part of a United Nations trusteeship after World War II, with the promise that America would protect the islanders and prepare them for eventual self-governance. Instead, their lands became a nuclear laboratory, and their bodies became data points. The long shadow of Project 4.1 still hangs over U.S.-Marshallese relations. To this day, many survivors and their descendants deal with the health consequences of radiation exposure. Cancer rates remain disproportionately high, and environmental contamination has left several atolls uninhabitable even 70 years later. Compensation programs have been inadequate, and funds promised under international agreements have often fallen short of covering medical care, relocation, and cleanup costs. Many Marshallese have migrated to the United States, where they live with the double burden of displacement and the enduring trauma of having been subjects in one of the most controversial experiments of the nuclear age. The ethical implications of Project 4.1 extend beyond the Marshall Islands. They speak to a broader pattern in the early Cold War era, when the United States and other nuclear powers engaged in secret human experimentation in the name of science and national security. From plutonium injection studies on unsuspecting hospital patients to radiation tests on prisoners and soldiers, the era was marked by a willingness to treat certain populations as expendable. In this sense, Project 4.1 is not an isolated scandal, but part of a larger history of questionable scientific ethics during the race for nuclear dominance. Looking back, what makes the episode so striking is not only the suffering it caused, but also the way it challenges the narrative of American exceptionalism. The same nation that championed democracy, human rights, and the liberation of oppressed peoples also subjected a vulnerable population under its guardianship to experiments without consent. The Marshallese, whose voices were long ignored, have fought to preserve this memory, to ensure that the world does not forget the human cost hidden in the footnotes of the Cold War. The story of Project 4.1 is not merely about radiation, science, or geopolitics. It is about how power can silence the powerless, how progress can be built upon the suffering of those denied a voice, and how secrecy can mask even the gravest of injustices. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that the pursuit of knowledge and security can come at the expense of human dignity. For Marshallese, the fallout was never just ash falling from the sky. It was a betrayal that lingers in their bodies, their families, and their lands. For America, it is a chapter that reveals how the line between protector and exploiter can be crossed in the shadows of history. In the end, Project 4.1 stands as a reminder that the measure of a nation is not only in the strength of its weapons or the depth of its knowledge, but in the way it treats those who are most vulnerable. To remember this story is to honor those who were never given a choice, whose suffering became data, and whose voices remind us that history's progress is never free of cost.